Hello, welcome back. So let's start with some of the first layers I think we'll need to bring this effect to life, essentially. If I come back to some of the reference we were looking at, here's the one from Pacific Rim, and I was mentioning that the leading edge of the EMP here probably has some kind of volumetric, and like I was saying before with a different effect, I think a large part of what you're actually looking at is the effect of light on the atmosphere. So in terms of this one here, there's two ways you could go about it. And one of them would be imagining the environment is full of some super low density atmospherics, which you could make. And then you just have areas of the sphere lighting those up. Or in the case of what I'm going to do here is just make a volume from our sphere and have that expand with the sphere itself as well. And what we'll want to do is make that very low density as well. So we'll have a super low density volume and then just make sure that the sphere itself lights it up. So let's start just with some quick setup for the actual sphere and how we can get that to light. Oops. So I'll put down a new geo. So that can be our main shockwave. So if I come in here, I'm going to call in my spheres. So there's our animated spheres there. And one thing I always make sure I have is at least the beginnings of an interactive area between the shockwave or the pulse or whatever it is with the environment. So let's bring our environment in as well. And before we do anything, let's also compute velocity. So I can just put down a trail. The point count shouldn't be changing. So we should get a decent velocity from this. And the velocity won't change over time, but it gives us something to work with in case we need to transfer that to the environment or use that as a source for other effects. And then let's put down a wrangle and do the old transfer. So we'll do CD equals 1 on our environment, and I'll do 0 on our spheres. So we'll start with 0 as a color. And then attribute transfer the color to the sphere. So we just want to blend this in. And I'm going to ghost the environment here so I can see. Oh, it didn't really help. Let's do this. I'll set the alpha back to 1 for now. Okay, so this is looking super low res, which it is. So I'll need to do something about that. Just going to put down a subdivide, maybe before the trail, so we get updated higher sample velocity there. So we'll need some decent subdivisions on here. I'm going to go with 3 for now. But the intention is, if we move into shading on the actual sphere itself, we can use this attribute to drive levels of our shader or adding more noise in certain places, stuff like that. So we need a decent width, and just have a look at how this looks running in the background, and you can see what will happen is even when it moves over that tree, there can be an edge of the tree is affecting the front of the sphere. And then as we move past all of that detailed environment, we get those objects in the background interacting and the wall right at the back. So this we can use, basically we can use that as a light. So I can plug the entire sphere in to a geolight, and the only parts that would have intense effect on the environment or on our volume will be these bright parts here. So another way to make this a bit more accurate is we don't care about the environment geometry, we just need something to represent the environment. So I'm going to do a big scatter of points here. So we got loads of points now. And if we can compare, now we're getting some of that ground interaction as well. So before I did that, there's not enough points on the ground to transfer. So that should cover us for that. And another thing that we might need to do before we shade this is smooth off this color. As you can see, sometimes they start to intersect with each other, so we get a pretty bad looking transfer there. Basically what I'm doing now is I'm setting up the basic attributes that I think I'll need for the geolight itself, but I'm thinking ahead slightly towards shading the sphere. So there's a nice smooth version. So that can be the renderable sphere, and then we can use the cheaper version as a geolight. So something like that will do as a base anyway, or at least converting what we had from animation into something that has some benefit for us moving forward with the effects. So let me leave that the way it is for now. And let's actually make the volume that I was talking about. So if we come back over here, here is our animation. And if I'm generating a volume from the sphere itself, I can do that before the animation. So I guess there's a few ways I could do this. I could use, like, we need nothing special. So it could just be, oop, too high. Could just be an ISO offset. Or if we want more control of our density later on, we could use a VDB. I could actually use a point attribute on here, so I could say points from volume on our sphere and just get a point cloud. Just get these all jittered up. So we fill the sphere with points, and then I'll put down a density attribute. And we can actually key this one to match our animation over there. So I had, I believe it was 173 to 220 for the first sphere. So maybe let's just go with a density of 1. So it's really dense, and then as the spheres fade off, it goes down to 0. So now if we use this and rasterize, that density will update in this volume as well. Got these the wrong way around. Okay, so that's density 0. So we come back here, and there's our volume. So we can go pretty low on the point size. And super low on the density. So this will be our actual renderable density in this volume. So now we have a volume that represents our sphere, and the timing of its density coincides with the timing that our sphere fades off. So my idea here is basically we fill in that sphere with this volume, and it can be so low density that we're only seeing it because the light of the EMP itself is brightening it up. So you can see that effect over here as well. So there's nothing going on in this scene except this bright fiery substance here on this creature, but this glow could be the effect of the light on the atmosphere. So instead of just doing a glowing comp, this one will feel much more tightly related to the sphere itself. And if it doesn't look good, we can add a noise to this as well and make it look more interesting. But we just want to add some density and some depth to the shockwave before we do any other effects. So now we have that volume. Put down a visualizer quick. Got to name it density. So we'll just have a white density there, and I can increase the density just to visualize if I need to. And then we just duplicate this sphere anim. So luckily now at this point we don't need to generate this volume every frame. And if we had made a volume after the animation of the spheres, it would need to go higher and higher resolution of volume as it tries to add voxels to spheres of a different scale. So we're just making sure that we have something volumetric for our shockwave to light, and that volume is independent of the final size of the sphere because we're actually just scaling that volume up as well. So it's just to make sure we're staying nice and cheap. We don't need anything fancy from this volumetric. We can output that there. And then simply let's go with effect shock volume. And there we should have it. So really just laying down the groundwork here. We've got a sphere that has the startings of what we think would be an interaction area. So as it moves through the environment, it has an attribute that kind of interacts with whatever it's rolling over. So you can see it quite clearly there. So we've got the basis of an interaction, so that can be used as a source for a simulated volume or in the shader. And then we have this volume over here, which is really just basically as soon as this shockwave comes anywhere past the camera, we're inside a volumetric fog that's slowly fading off in density along with the sphere itself. So this fog is extremely useful for us here inside because we want to add some of that electrical effect in here. We want the areas where the EMP is interacting with the environment to cast light. We want this volume to pick that light up. We want some magical effects coming out with the electricity that can shine light on this volume. So it's super useful having this space inside filled with volume. And it's a very cheap volume because it's based on that sphere animation. So maybe we want to, just looking at this, come back here and change the ISO value on our points from volume just to make sure it's inside our sphere. So that should be fine. Okay, so we've got those two basic things down. I think I'll end this one here because in the next video I basically want to do a little bit of shading and generating these geolights before we move on to some more of the more exciting effects down here. I mean, these are basically kind of the most important parts in defining what's happening in the scene. So this shockwave will be our main source of light. This volume will be our main source of something that's being lit as well. So in terms of the front surface of the EMP and what is left behind it, these are kind of the basis of that whole effect. Everything else I'd kind of count as a secondary, although it's probably what we'll be looking at the most often, because as soon as this surface passes, we're going to want to see what's happening behind here. But let me end this one here and we'll do a little bit of shading. At least make sure we've got a volume shader and a geolight that works quite well before we carry on. So I'll see you in the next one.